Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Our mission, as always, is to take complex laws and policies and, well, make sense of them for you.
And today we're tackling a really significant one for South Africa's energy future.
That's right. We're diving into the Upstream Petroleum Resources Development Act, Act 23 of 2024. It's the new blueprint for oil and gas.
Exactly. It was signed into law October 25th, 2024. It's not quite commenced yet. That's still to be proclaimed, but the text is there.
And we're going straight to the source today, the official act itself. No secondhand accounts.
Yep. And the first thing you really need to grasp, I think, is just how fundamental a change this is. It's a complete pivot.
A pivot away from how things used to be done.
Totally. For years, oil and gas were just sort of lumped in with mining under the MPRDA, the Mineral and Petroleum Resources Development Act.
I remember that. Always seemed a bit of an odd fit.
It was. This new act creates a dedicated legal home just for petroleum. It pulls it out completely.
So Schedule 2 of this act, that's where the separation happens.
That's the mechanism, yes. It goes through the old MPRDA and systematically takes out pretty much every mention of petroleum exploration rights, production rights relating to oil and gas. It's a clean break.
Okay, so the goal is a standalone system. What's the stated aim? Why do this now?
Well, the act says it's about governing the orderly, equitable, and sustainable acceleration of developing these resources. It's about speeding things up, but doing it properly.
Let's start with the basics then. The preamble, Chapter 2, the foundational ideas. Who actually owns the oil and gas?
Section 3 leaves no doubt. South Africa's petroleum resources belong to the nation, full stop.
And the state.
The state, specifically the minister, acts as the custodian for everyone. That principle underpins everything else.
So when you look at Section 2, the objects of the act, it's not just about drilling, is it? There are wider goals baked in.
Oh, absolutely. It's multifaceted. Yes, it wants to accelerate exploration, boost economic recovery, and crucially guarantee security of tenure for operators. That's key for investment.
But there's more.
Definitely. Big focus on equitable access for all South Africans. And it specifically calls out the need to substantially, meaningfully expand opportunities for Black persons to participate actively.
So development is tied to empowerment and local benefit from the start, like local jobs, skills.
Precisely. Local content isn't an afterthought, it's woven into the objectives, and you need that investor certainty to drive the kind of projects that deliver those benefits. Which brings us to the new legal tool.
Ah, yes, the petroleum right. This replaces the old separate rights.
It does. It's a single integrated right covering both exploration and production.
Oh.
And here's the really critical legal point, especially for finance people listening.
Yep.
Section 5 defines this right, once it's granted and registered, as a limited real right.
A limited real right. Why is that specific legal definition so important? If you're funding a massive offshore project, what does that mean practically?
It means security. Think of it like a mortgage on a house. It's a right registered against the asset, in this case, the resource potential in that specific area. It's bankable.
Bankable how?
Companies can use this registered right as collateral. It gives them a much stronger legal claim than just a contractual license, offering solid security of tenure. That makes it easier to raise the huge sums needed, especially for risky deep water stuff.
Okay, that makes sense. So a more secure, unified right. Who's managing this new system then? Who's the regulator?
All roads lead to PASA, the Petroleum Agency of South Africa. Section 9 designates PASA as the central authority. They're the gatekeeper and the enforcer for the whole upstream process.
And their powers have grown quite a bit under this act, especially around data and strategy.
Significantly. Section 10 details their functions. One really interesting one is PASA taking a proactive role in strategy, like doing initial seismic surveys in frontier areas before licensing rounds even happen.
So they do some of the early, costly work to attract bidders.
Kind of de-risking it, yeah. And they become the central repository for all the geotechnical data companies collect. Critically, that data becomes the sole property of the state once submitted.
The company can use it while they hold the right, I assume?
Yes, during the right's duration. But ownership rests with the state. That gives the government huge insight and control over the national resource picture.
What about controlling the commercial side, like pipelines and facilities?
Yeah.
If someone makes a big fine, can they block others from using nearby infrastructure?
That's addressed too. Section 10 and Section 68 give PASA, working with NERSA, the energy regulator, the power to set and approve tariffs for third-party access to upstream infrastructure.
So pipelines, processing plants.
Exactly. It prevents monopolies and ensures that essential facilities are accessible, which helps maximize overall recovery for the country. PESA also gets the job of verifying production figures to make sure royalties are calculated correctly.
Right, the financial oversight.
Yeah.
Okay, let's walk through getting one of these rights. It starts with licensing rounds.
Generally, yes. Competitive administrative rounds or sometimes open licensing rounds, as laid out in Section 13 and 37.
And the duration of these rights, it seems to vary quite a bit.
It does. It's tailored. A basic reconnaissance permit, just for initial data gathering, is short, max 2 years, can't be transferred, can't be renewed. Simple.
But the main petroleum
Right.
for exploration.
That's split. Depends on the territory. For what they call shallow water or onshore areas, the total exploration phase is 9 years.
9 years broken down how?
It's an initial 3-year term. Then you can apply for 3 renewals of 2 years each. So 3 plus 2 plus 2 plus 2.
Okay. And for the tougher areas?
Yeah.
Deep water, frontiers.
Those areas designated by PESA as deep water or frontier get longer. Total exploration phase is 14 years.
14. How's that structured?
A 5-year initial term, followed by 3 possible renewals of 3 years each. 5 plus 3 plus 3 plus 3.
That's a significant difference, 9 years versus 14. Why the extra time for deep water?
It reflects the reality. The geological risks, the technical challenges, the sheer cost. They're orders of magnitude higher in deep water frontier zones. You're talking billions in investment before you even know if there's commercial oil.
So that longer tenure is basically an incentive to attract companies willing to take that massive upfront gamble.
Absolutely. Without that long-term security, the financial models just wouldn't work for frontier exploration. No one would commit the capital.
And if they do find something and move to production?
Then you get real long-term stability. The initial production phase is 30 years. And after that, you can apply for unlimited renewals of 10 years each.
30 years initial plus potentially decades more. That's serious tenure.
It has to be to justify the investment. But during exploration, there's a catch to stop companies just sitting on huge areas without working them.
You mean the relinquishment rules?
Exactly. Section 46 mandates it. You have to give parts of the area back over time.
I'm like,
You relinquish 20% of the original area at the end of your initial exploration term. Then you give back another 15% at the end of each subsequent renewal term during exploration.
so the area keeps shrinking unless you actively find something worth developing. Keeps land recycling back into the system.
That's the idea. Keep the acreage active. And if you do make a discovery, Section 54 kicks in.
What does that require?
Swift action. You have to notify PSA within 5 days. Then you need to test it and submit an appraisal plan to see if it's commercial.
And if you find something but decide not to test it, maybe it looks marginal.
Then you lose it. The act is clear. If you choose not to test, the area covering that geological structure must be relinquished immediately. No sitting on potential fines.
Okay, so you've explored, you found something, appraised it. Now you want to move into that 30-year production phase.
Right.
What hurdles do you need to clear? Sections 58 and 59.
Right. It's not automatic. You need a detailed development and production plan, obviously. Proof you have the technical and financial muscle. You need your environmental authorizations sorted.
Standard stuff for major projects.
Yes, but crucially, you also need approval of your local content plan. That's the concrete commitment on local jobs, skills, using South African suppliers. It's a major gatekeeper for getting production approval.
That linkage is explicit then. Okay, let's shift to the really big commercial stuff. The parts that directly hit the bottom line for operators, empowerment, and the state's role. Start with Black persons' participation.
Section 31 lays it out. Every single petroleum must have a minimum 10% undivided participating interest held by Black persons. Mandatory.
10% across the board. How does that work financially? Is it carried? And what if the Black partners need to raise capital later?
Good questions. The Act anticipates this. While 10% is the starting point, Section 33 allows that interest to be diluted, but not below 5%, specifically for raising capital.
Okay, some flexibility. What about partners exiting? Does the company lose its empowerment status immediately?
This is quite unique. The Act provides a way for a company to retain its empowerment credentials even after the Black persons exit the investment, provided certain conditions are met.
Such as?
Such as the interest being held for a minimum period equivalent to a third of the initial production term, and at least half the net value must have actually vested in the Black partners before they exit.
So it recognizes the initial contribution and allows for mature exits without penalizing the operator instantly. That seems designed to provide some commercial predictability.
It tries to strike a balance, but then you have the state's direct involvement, which is probably the most impactful provision financially.
The state's 20% carried interest, Section 34. Explain what carried means here.
Right. The state gets a 20% stake in all petroleum rights, exploration, and production. This stake is managed by the designated State Petroleum Company. Carried means the state doesn't have to put up its 20% share of the costs up front.
So the commercial partner pays the state's share initially.
Yes. The other partners, the carrying holders, fund the state's 20% during exploration and development. They do get repaid, but here's the crucial part.
The repayment terms.
They only recover 50% of the state's share of exploration costs, and they recover 100% of the state's share of production costs. Repayment comes from the state's future share of oil or revenue.
Wait, only 50% of exploration costs. Let's break that down. If an exploration well costs, say, R1,billion,
The state's 20% share is R200 million. The commercial partners pay that R200 million upfront.
and if the well is successful and leads to production.
The state only has to repay R100 million of that R200 million exploration cost from its share of future production. The commercial partners effectively absorb the other R100 million of the state's exploration risk.
Wow. So the operator subsidizes half of the state's high-risk exploration gamble. That's a significant cost compared to many global regimes.
It is. It fundamentally changes the risk-reward calculation for companies. The state gets a major upside with significantly reduced downside risk in the riskiest phase.
That's a major point for potential investors to factor in. Okay, one more national mandate. Strategic stock, Section 36.
Yes, this ties into national energy security. Holders have a legal obligation to sell a certain percentage of what they produce to the state or its designated entity for the national strategic stockpile.
At what price?
Prevailing market price. So it's not confiscatory, but the obligation to sell domestically for strategic needs is mandatory.
Okay, let's talk enforcement. This is a complex act, high stakes. What happens if a company doesn't comply? Fails on work commitments, for instance.
The act has teeth. Section 88 gives the minister serious powers suspending or even canceling a right for breaches. Submitting false info is another big one.
And fines?
They can be massive. The penalties are designed to hurt even for large multinationals. Section 102 deals with offenses.
How massive.
For major offenses like illegal drilling or production, ignoring compliance notices, the fines can go up to 10% of the company's annual turnover generated in South Africa and from its exports from the Republic.
10% of turnover, not just profit, including exports. That's enormous. That sends a very strong signal about compliance.
It does. It aims to make non-compliance financially unthinkable. And there are prison terms, too, up to 10 years for things like obstructing officials. Plus, Section 103 allows the Director General to slap on administrative penalties up to R$800,000 for lesser breaches. It's tiered enforcement.
All right, one last thing before we wrap up environmental responsibility. What happens when the oil is gone and the company leaves? Section 84.
No easy exit there. The holder remains legally liable for all environmental damage, pollution, rehabilitation, decommissioning, everything, until the minister formally issues a closure certificate.
So the long-term environmental responsibility stays firmly with the operator.
Absolutely. The state ensures it's not left holding the environmental baby, so to speak.
Okay, so pulling this all together from our deep dives. This act clearly delivers on providing a single, dedicated framework for petroleum. That integrated petroleum right, as a limited real right, offers much-needed regulatory certainty.
It does create that clear pathway which the industry has wanted.
But, and it's a big but, it wraps that certainty in some very significant national mandates and commercial obligations. The 10% black participation, the local content requirements, and especially that 20% state carried interest with its unique cost recovery model.
It defines the cost of entry very clearly. It's a specific South African model.
Which leads us to the final thought for you, our listeners, to ponder. The Act seems to achieve its goal of blending investment certainty with national development goals. But given that financial structure, particularly the state being carried for half its exploration risk, how will global oil and gas companies weigh the benefit of secure tenure against the potentially higher cost of entry imposed by these specific South African national interest provisions?
That balance, how companies make that calculation, will really shake the pace and scale of development, especially in those challenging frontier basins over the next decade or so.
Indeed it will. Something to watch closely. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.